For young architects, it's important, A, to care. Because if you don't care, it doesn't matter. B, to realize that we're not here to build for other architects. We're here to build for all of humankind in a way. And we're here to accommodate life and work of so many different people from so many different backgrounds. So that first of all, we really need to care about the people we are designing for, understand what their dreams and desires and priorities are. And then we have to use that understanding as the driving force of the work we put forward. Because the second we know what questions that are important, then all we have to do is answer them. I think when I look at how I developed as an architect when I was a student, it was you can sort of describe it as sort of professional a serial monogamy in a way. That I would always fall in love with the work of an architect, and then I would like really dive deep into that, and then almost like digging so deep into this particular obsession that, and when you dig deep enough, you also reach a certain point where, and I think this is true in architecture and in art and probably in philosophy or technology or whatever, that at some point you reach the root assumptions. That once you start questioning those assumptions, the foundation of everything just collapses. And then that in a way frees you to look in another direction. It's almost like, you know, in Nietzschean terms, he talks about how you philosophize with the hammer. That you hammer on these different concepts or like values to see if there's actually any substantial underpinnings behind. And sometimes there's a value that is no longer valid. It's a hollow concept, and it shatters when you hit it with the hammer. And I think in a way I studied architecture with a hammer for like a few years. Until I reached a certain point where I found an architect, Rem Koolhaas, who then ended up becoming my boss when I went to work for him, where he had a background in journalism. And I think what was interesting for me, what was eye-opening, was that all of their projects dealt with some kind of a situation, a political or a sort of economical, technological situation that in a way made the architecture reflect on society. This idea that architecture wasn't like an autonomous art form happening just within its own terms, but it was actually like in direct dialogue with things going on in society, became eye-opening to me. Architecture for me is fundamentally the art and science of accommodating life, which essentially means that architecture gives architects and people the power to literally create the world that they would like to live in. And I think one of the things that's interesting, just to take a step back and really understand how fundamentally important architecture is that right now geologists talk about the age we live in as the Anthropocene. So it's the name, it's a proposal for a name of a geological era that we live in, and you know, you divide the geological history of the planet into different eras that are often named after the one element that, or force that had the most influence on the geographical transformations in that era. And the Anthropocene is this idea that maybe we're now living in a time where human presence is the strongest force of change in our geography, like rising water levels, accelerating wind speeds, rivers being dammed, valleys being covered in lakes, whole areas is being deforested, or desertification, or agriculture. Like, there's so much influence on the geography that is coming from human presence. And it's just funny, when you look at it, some geologists believe that the Anthropocene began in the 18th century with the advent of industrialization. But others actually speculate that maybe the Anthropocene started already 8,000 years ago, when we started domesticating animals and plants, and we became sedentary. We started settling. We're not roaming around. We were actually staying put. We made fields and fences for our cattle, and we started building buildings. So essentially, the moment we became architects, we made a very important inversion of evolution. Because evolution, according to Darwin, essentially is a principle that life has evolved by adapting to its surroundings. But 8,000 years ago, we became architects, and now life acquired the tools and the skills to adapt the surroundings to life. And if you can see, if at a planetary scale, geologists are now saying that humans unquestionably have the power to transform the planet at a planetary level. With great power comes great responsibility. So we also really have an amazing responsibility and opportunity to really create the world of our dreams. I mean, I think for young architects, it's very important to acquire the tools and the language to interact with other people than architects. I think architecture has been isolated within its own bubble. You can say, like, in the post-war, like in the 50s and 60s, there was a huge boom and an urbanization and a suburbanization. So there was a lot of, architects were granted a lot of power because it was important to create all this housing for this sort of new prosperity. And a lot of those experiments failed in different ways. It created like monotonous urban environments, and I think the world and architects lost confidence in architecture, and architecture sort of isolated itself in different academic discourses like postmodernism, deconstructivism, etc. And I think what needs to happen now is that architects need to reinsert architecture as something that people are interested in, not just architects, something that is important for society, and that it's not just a stylistic exercise of like redecorating your bathroom. It's literally a question of deciding as a species what kind of world we want to live in.